therefore vis-a-vis Beijing?
Yes.
Excellent.
The answer is yes.
Good.
The market is very supply constrained currently, and if you build the type of resorts that you're going to build, and you continue to build the fast trains from, southern China down to Macau, and you complete the bridge from Hong Kong, you will be more constrained than you are today. When I first came to Macau, I could actually afford to sit at a table and play cards, and now you can't. And every time I come here, it seems like the table limits go up again and again and again. And I mean, price would indicate alone that you're supply constrained. And price in this case is your minimum table bets. And if you're going to build 6 new resorts, which is basically everyone that exists building a property greater than the size of their existing properties, I mean, obviously Las Vegas Sands wouldn't be, or Sands China wouldn't be included in that, you will be more supply constrained than you are today.
Let me just pick up on that point, because I think table limits is an interesting issue to think about. Certainly they have been rising, and during golden weeks it's very hard to find a table on the mass floor where you can bet with less than 500 Hong Kong. But when we look at the fact that Macau is now rapidly growing in mass, is it inimical to that growth that you've also got pressure on table bet limits? Or is it something you just think is part and parcel of that growth?
I just think it goes to supply constraint. I mean, the market doesn't have enough tables, or the limits would be lower. And as the limits keep on going up, and by the way, the limits don't always indicate even, average bet. Average bet is even, has also gone up over time. But minimum table limits do give you a pretty clear indication of what that demand versus supply environment looks like.
But they also present an opportunity for diversification. There is one casino in town I won't mention, but it makes it very tidy living out of very low bet limits. And supply constraint doesn't seem to be an issue for it. However, that said, of course, it doesn't provide accommodation either. So it's very much player in, player out. There's no additional benefits or fringes associated with it. Let's move on from that particular issue and talk about junkets. I think everyone here has got some position on junkets and their future viability and relevance in not only the Macau market but also in the broader context of Asia. We know, for example, that Singapore has taken a very restrictive approach to junkets compared to Macau, which for historical reasons as much as anything has been far more liberal. But in particular, I'd like to talk about liquidity and capitalisation at junkets. We've had a couple of recent examples of junkets apparently running into significant problems either directly or through affiliates, where it would suggest that their model may be under some stress. Do either of you have an opinion about that? Is the junket model likely to change materially?
It's getting smaller. It's not growing as fast. It's becoming smaller. The total market, the premium mass is growing the most. So its significance decreases every year in size. It still plays a role, because if you want to take bets from Chinese nationals and you don't want to take any credit risk, then you have to go through a junket. So as long as that stays in place, which I believe it will, that you will always have junkets, and you will have some junket growth, but it becomes less significant over time.
Yeah, on the way that the junkets handle their money, I'm sure many people, if not everyone here, is familiar with the incident involving the Kimran junket a few weeks ago, where, if you believe the reports, including my own, somewhere between $1 billion and $1.3 billion US was left behind as as it appears a combination of debt and cash that was extracted from investors in that junket, or more properly in the person who claimed to be acting on behalf of the junket, as well as allegedly organisations employing side betting on behalf of a syndicate of individuals who were collecting cash from the winning bets to pay back previous debt, but then at one point stopping collecting cash but not paying back the debt and then fleeing with the cash that they'd accumulated. Now the question became, with such an enormous amount of money that was allegedly left behind as debt, would this ripple through the system? But it appears, as we heard yesterday from Grant Bowie and others, because the operators themselves weren't directly exposed to this kind of activity, and even if there was some kind of remote exposure, by and large, even at this volume, these kinds of incidents are not considered to be particularly galling, because the structures themselves remain fairly sound. However, the question that, probably after that verbose introduction, what I should say is the question that maybe should be asked is, was that Ponzi scheme type scam that allegedly took place, is that representative of a wider structural way in which junkets employ their money? Junkets remain very opaque in their operations, even after all of the engagement in the media and even after the listing of various companies with junket interests in Macau. That remains an open question. However, I think perhaps another way of framing it would be is if this kind of incident took place involving a very conspicuous and large junket, as opposed to a junket that most people might not have heard of until now, then we might have a serious problem. Even despite consolidation in the junket market, which has come about because of various pressures, market forces and regulatory forces, if there is too much concentration of volume in too few junkets, and if one of those junkets for some reason suffers a similar incident, then we might have a much more serious problem.
Do you have any color on the reaction by the regulatory authorities and what type of